How soldiers made mortars from water pipes. Opening 000-130. Narrator: how did soldiers, facing the relentless, overwhelming firepower of a prepared enemy, turn ordinary water pipes into instruments of life-saving fire support? The Second World War was a conflict defined by industrial might and mass-produced weaponry. Yet, in the grinding, desperate reality of frontline combat, often stripped bare of resupply and formal support, it was ingenuity that became the most powerful weapon of all. We are in the unforgiving theater of the Southwest Pacific, the island-hopping campaign of 1943, specifically the dense, humid hellscape of New Britain in the territory of New Guinea. The date is March 18, 1945, late in the campaign, and the specific units involved are the Australian 14th 32 Battalion, Australian Imperial Force AIF, part of the 5th Division. Their objective, the Japanese-held outpost of Waitavelo near Wide Bay. The conditions were suffocating, the terrain an oppressive blanket of jungle, and the enemy, the remnants of the Japanese 51st Division, was dug in with fanatical resolve. This is the story of desperate men cut off and out of options who crafted a bizarre, ugly weapon of war from scrap, and in doing so, ensured their own survival. Background 130-500. Narrator: the war against the Empire of Japan was a different kind of fight. It was waged in a theater where logistics were a nightmare and the enemy refused to acknowledge surrender. The Australians in New Guinea faced not just a determined foe, but a tropical environment that shredded equipment and morale in equal measure. By early 1945, the Australian 14th 32 Battalion was engaged in a steady, brutal clearance operation. Their mission was to eliminate the isolated but still dangerous Japanese pockets scattered across New Britain. The advance was slow, measured in yards, not miles, against pillboxes, spider holes, and heavy jungle cover. Infantry companies like those spearheading the assault on Waitavelo frequently found themselves outside the effective range of their own heavy weapons. Their 3-inch mortars were too few, their ammunition too heavy to haul through the swamps and ridges in necessary quantities. The main characters in this tale are not officers, but the sappers and ordnance men, the technical minds of the AIF, and the hardened digger infantrymen who relied on them. They knew that in the jungle, high-angle fire was often the only way to dislodge a prepared enemy position. A mortar could drop a shell directly into a dugout or trench that a flat-trajectory machine gun or rifle could never reach. But at Waitavelo, their existing support was insufficient. The Japanese, specifically the units defending the area, had established a formidable perimeter. They were using their limited but effective Type 9781 mortars and Type 9270 infantry guns to pin down the advancing Australians. For the 14th 32 Battalion, the fight became a desperate close-quarters struggle, crying out for more high-explosive saturation. This was a moment of critical need. They required an artillery piece that didn't need a road to be deployed, a weapon that could be conjured from thin air. Without it, their casualties would mount into the hundreds. Building tension 500-1500. Narrator: the push toward Waitavelo was relentless but costly. For days, the jungle perimeter was a meat grinder. The Australians faced a coordinated defense. The air was thick with the reek of cordite, blood, and decaying vegetation. By 1,000 hours on March 18, a Company 14th 32 had stalled, pinned down by a flurry of automatic fire in a particularly stubborn bunker position. The roar of Japanese Nambu machine guns was continuous, a terrifying buzzsaw sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The company commander radioed back the grim reality. They needed smoke to obscure their advance and high-explosive saturation to eliminate the concrete-reinforced strong. The battalion's forward observers frantically tried to call in the existing 3-inch mortar support, but the enemy positions were too close, risking friendly fire, and the mortar tube wear was already critical. They were rationing their precious rounds. The engineers and logistics personnel back at the hastily established rear perimeter understood the mathematics of the situation. Ammunition was finite, enemy resolve was not. But one team of sappers, men accustomed to building and demolishing with equal proficiency, had been studying a captured Japanese weapon, an improvised spigot mortar. It was a crude, jury-rigged thing, a testament to the desperate nature of the Japanese supply lines, but it gave them an idea. The Japanese weapon, though rudimentary, had used captured 105 and Type 91 howitzer shells, which the Australians had also secured in limited number. These shells were useless without a proper howitzer, but their warhead was potent. At 1200 hours, a small detail led by a resourceful ordnance officer began their audacious experiment. They scoured the abandoned Japanese positions and, more importantly, the detritus of the local infrastructure, pre-war colonial piping and construction scrap. Their search yielded a promising find: a length of steel water pipe, approximately 4 inches in external diameter. This size was almost perfectly suited to accommodate the base of the captured Japanese 105 projectile. The next 3 hours were a frenzy of improvisation. They needed 3 main components: a barrel, a baseplate to absorb the incredible recoil, and a firing mechanism. They fashioned a crude baseplate from heavy angle iron and 2 lengths of steel tubing, forming a rough sled-like structure. The 4-inch water pipe was cut down to a length of about 17 inches and welded roughly to the angle iron at a steep 45-degree fixed angle. There would be no complex aiming mechanism, just a fixed trajectory. The high angle was necessary to clear the jungle canopy. The firing mechanism was the most critical and dangerous piece. They welded a metal disc inside the pipe, a few inches from the base, creating a chamber. Through the center of this disc, they threaded a modified primer holder designed to use a rimmed cartridge. A .303 rifle round could serve as a crude single-shot firing primer. This assembly was activated by a simple spring-loaded firing pin, held in a cocked position by a basic latch. A long 20-foot lanyard would be attached to the latch. The gunner would fire from cover or risk a catastrophic misfire and explosion. By 1500 hours, the weapon was complete. An ugly, non-standard, fixed-elevation 105 improvised artillery mortar. Its effectiveness was entirely unknown. Little did they know that this Frankenstein's monster of a weapon was about to enter the legendary annals of Australian ingenuity. The Crisis 1500-2200. Narrator: the call came down the line, the improvised mortar was ready. The men of the forward companies were skeptical. They had been taught to trust the precise, standard-issue ordnance of the Commonwealth. What was this crude contraption of plumbing and scrap metal? But the desperation was real. The Japanese position, at a grid reference near 632,521, was proving impenetrable. A company's advance was completely arrested. They were exposed, taking casualties and losing ground to aggressive Japanese counterattacks. Sergeant Major Davies, commanding a forward platoon, reported to his company commander, "We're pinned, sir. Their light mortar fire is accurate and the bunker position has a clear field of fire. We need a miracle." The ordnance team, led by a corporal whose name has sadly been lost to the official records, dragged the heavy, ungainly weapon forward. The mere act of deploying it was exhausting: the weight, the rough, sharp edges of the angle iron base. They positioned it on a slight rise, its muzzle pointed toward the map coordinates of the entrenched enemy. The only sighting device was a simple white line painted crudely down the side of the steel pipe. The moment of truth arrived at 1600 hours. They loaded the first improvised round. The process itself was nerve-wracking. A captured 105 shell, its base fitted with 4 brass fins, was slid over the spigot, its weight resting on the firing pin assembly. The small explosive charge, a mix of cordite propellant, was carefully placed in the chamber. The firing pin was cocked and the lanyard unspooled. Every soldier in the immediate vicinity flattened themselves. The jungle fell silent, save for the rhythmic chug-chug of the distant enemy machine guns. The corporal pulled the lanyard. There was a terrifying, violent K-boom, not the satisfying thump of a standard mortar but a ragged, ear-splitting explosion of propellant. The weapon lurched violently backwards, but the pipe held. The baseplate dug in, and a massive, smoking 105 shell was hurled skyward, a dark, spinning menace. It landed approximately 150 yards short of the target, a miss. The Japanese, alerted by the new, heavy sound, immediately shifted their Type 97 fire onto the suspected launch site. Shrapnel rained through the canopy. The crisis deepened. The men had pinned their hope on this one crude instrument, and now they were more exposed than before. A second shell, a third, all were misses. The fixed-angle crude sighting meant that adjusting range was a terrifying game of trial and error, involving changing the propellant charge and nudging the entire baseplate by hand. It was a terrifying, dangerous procedure. By 1730 hours, the Australian casualties had risen and the forward advance was on the verge of collapsing into a full retreat. The Japanese bunker remained untouched, its machine gun spitting death. The corporal and his crew, utterly exposed, were running out of time and patience. The weight of the battle, the fear for the men pinned down, rested on their shoulders. They had to make it work against impossible odds. The turning point: 2200-2700. Narrator: exhausted, deafened, and covered in mud, the corporal made the heroic decision. No more guesswork. He realized that the baseplate, crudely welded, was slightly uneven. He called for a pickaxe and, under a furious hail of enemy fire, he and a private began digging a small trench for one side of the baseplate, tilting the entire assembly a fraction of a degree. This was a direct, manual adjustment of the weapon's deflection and elevation. a sheer act of improvisation that was utterly outside of doctrine, a move only desperate circumstances could justify. He estimated the new deflection, checked the propellant charge. He was down to only a few serviceable shells. This was it, the final, all-or-nothing moment. He loaded the fourth round. Again the tension was unbearable. The corporal gripped the lanyard. Pause. 1755 hours, he pulled. Kaboom! The improvised mortar bucked, the sound echoing ominously through the jungle. All eyes were on the sky. The shell, its brass fins spinning wildly, flew in a perfectly high arc over the canopy. It sailed over the forward company positions and then... crash! The 105 projectile impacted directly on top of the main enemy bunker. It was not a precision strike, but a direct hit on the fortified target. The resulting explosion was tremendous, far larger than any of the standard 3-inch rounds the Australians possessed. The shell's heavy high-explosive payload detonated with terrifying finality. The deafening roar was followed by a plume of smoke and debris, and then, a sudden, miraculous silence. The Japanese machine gun was silenced. The entire strongpoint was neutralized. The blast had collapsed a section of the bunker and killed or stunned the defenders. The turning point was instantaneous. The company commander, seizing the unexpected opportunity, immediately ordered the assault. The digger infantrymen, roused by the sight of the giant explosion, charged the ruined position. They found the bunker complex devastated and the fanatical defense broken. The crude, improvised mortar had succeeded where standard-issue weaponry could not. What happened next would become legendary among the forward-deployed companies. The water-pipe mortar had saved the day. The Japanese had been dislodged not by superior numbers or overwhelming artillery barrages, but by a single act of radical, desperate innovation, born from necessity and scrap metal. Resolution and Legacy, 2700-3000. Narrator: the immediate outcome of the action at Waitavalo was the successful elimination of the Japanese resistance in that sector. The 14th 32 Battalion, AIF, consolidated their position and pushed forward. The entire battle for the Waitavalo wide bay area in which the improvised mortar played its critical role resulted in the capture of the entire Japanese position at the cost of relatively light Australian casualties. The 105 improvised artillery mortar, a monstrosity of welded pipe and angle iron, was instrumental in breaking the deadlock. The sheer determination of the sappers and ordnance men to create the firepower they lacked proved decisive. The weapon itself was officially catalogued and later captured and preserved by the Australian War Memorial, a physical, tangible testament to the ingenuity of the Australian soldier. It was recovered at 12:35 hours on March 18, 1945, according to the battalion's war diary. While specific medals for this single act were not always awarded, the collective effort and success of the 14th 32 Battalion earned high praise for its persistent and resourceful fighting in the face of brutal conditions. The legacy of the water pipe mortar is profound. It serves as a potent symbol of the human cost of war and the incredible lengths men will go to save their comrades. It highlights a common truth across all WWII theaters. When the supply lines dry up and the enemy is just 200 yards away, military training must yield to mechanical creativity. It was the fusion of a builder's eye and a soldier's nerve that made this improvised weapon a success. Outro 30:00-31:00. Narrator: the war was not just fought with Sherman tanks or Spitfire aircraft. It was fought with the tools at hand, the angle iron, the water pipe, and the desperate ingenuity of the men on the ground. The simple, ugly machine born of necessity and scrap metal speaks volumes about the fight for survival in the Pacific. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.